Hello and welcome back to another Bartitsu Antagonistics Forum online training session. It all sounds like a big mouthful. Basically, this is our fifth session. Okay, let's start over because my teeth are clearly not firmly fixed in my mouth today. So, this is our fifth session. And really what we're trying to do here is we normally have a group that meets in Newcastle and we train in Bartitsu in the Prohibition Cabaret Bar in Newcastle. We use the upstairs bar and we normally meet up and punch each other and kick each other and hit each other with sticks there. Now obviously at the minute we're not allowed to venture out too far. So we are in the situation where I'm trying to provide material so that those people that normally come to my classes can try and remember a little bit about what we actually do so that I'm not losing quite so much ground when we go back again. We can hopefully pick up a little bit quicker because at least the knowledge is there even if people haven't been doing the practicing. And at the same time I thought it was a great opportunity to open this up, give people a chance to kind of eavesdrop into our classes as it were, find out a little bit about Bartitsu, find out a little bit about what we do, hopefully a bit of history, and we'll probably have a few laughs, mostly at my expense, along the way. And that is the plan. So, we've had 2 sessions on pugilism, then we've had 2 sessions on savate, so this is the first of 2 sessions on the cane or walking stick, which we're picking up on because it is the archetypal improvised weapon of Bartitsu. I wouldn't say that cane is necessarily a core part of Bartitsu, but improvised weapons are, and cane is the one that everyone thinks of, so that's the one we're going to focus on. Also, there are other reasons for focusing on it. It is a length of wood, relatively easy to get hold of or create a reasonably good facsimile of, and therefore really easy for you guys to find something to actually practice some of these basic moves with. Whereas if we were looking at something like longsword, it would be like, now if all of you want to go out and spend 500 quid on a new sword, it's just not really feasible. Also, I am aware that a lot of people, I know a lot of the demonstrations I've done over the years have been linked to the steampunk societies. They love their canes, so it's another one that just links in and gives them a chance to see some of this stuff as well. So that is kind of why we're going to be looking at cane today. But we shall start, as we always start, with falling in. So, slightly different with a cane, on the basis that I'm holding a cane. So normally there's a point where I have to put the hands up to my forehead. If I do that normally, I implant the cane in my face. And whilst I'm sure you would all love to see that, I want to carry on to the end of this without a concussion. So what you'll find is when my hands come up, rather than being in towards my chest, we just twist them 90 degrees so they're straight up. And this is the same with any weapons we do. The weapon is held up rather than through the face, as I'm sure you can understand. So we start from attention and fall in. And we're going to go not to a pugilism stance or a savate stance, but this time to a cane stance, which I will be talking about in a moment. But really, so what I want to do with this session is I want to break it into 2 halves, which is normally what I do, and normally I have a bit of a rambly session in the middle. The first bit I want to look at, there's no way of saying this without it sounding dirty, so let's just get on with it and you can all giggle along at home. We're going to be looking at some cane handling techniques. So we're going to be looking at how you hold your cane, how you handle your cane, and how you keep your cane happy. Essentially, these are the things you need to know before we go on to look at how to use them. Now, the advantages of unarmed combat is you have used your hands and feet your entire life, so you don't need to be shown how to use them. Most of you have never hit somebody with a stick. I shall rephrase that. None of you have hit anybody with... Sorry, I'm just going to wait for a very noisy motorcycle to go past. Sorry. So, most of you will have hit somebody with a stick, but probably whilst you were a kid and you probably got told off for doing it. What we want to do today is look at how to use a cane properly. So, before we started, I thought I would take a quick second to go through some of the canes I own, just so you get an idea of the kind of different things that are out there. I might even mention a few canes that I want to own but have yet to actually be able to purchase. So, we'll start with this one since I'm holding it. This is my standard cane that I use in class. It is 1-inch rattan. It can take a fair amount of battering, As you can see, if I hold it up close, you can probably see pits and scars on that from where it's been battered over the years. I've used it to parry Hutton sabers and all kinds of things that I shouldn't have. This is my standard week in, week out training weapon. It is too heavy. It is too long. It is too thick for what it's actually meant to represent. And that's one of the things we need to get to understanding. When people start looking at wanting to fight with a cane, they try to go as big and heavy a cane as you can get. And that's not what we're actually looking at here. If you think about a Victorian gentleman's walking stick, we're not... Okay, this is probably the kind of thing that comes to mind. Silver topped, black cane, solid piece of wood. Now there's nothing wrong with that, but again, that's still quite thick, quite hefty. This is for a prop, yeah? This is designed for leaning on and posing with. It's not really kind of what we'd look at with a Victorian cane. What I'm looking for is something more like this, like a switch or a small cane. Now I can lean on this, and I can use it for walking, that's all fine, but it's very thin, yeah? Weighted at one end, and I can get a lot of speed when I'm using it, and it will still hit with a reasonable amount of force. It won't hit with the same force as this, but this will move a lot faster. So in reality, this is what I'm training to use, but I want to use something bigger and slower and heavier, because if I can throw this around, I can throw this around. Something about if you can dodge a wrench, you can dodge anything, yeah? If I can swing this around my body and use it effectively, I will have no trouble with something smaller. But just so you're aware, this is what we're talking about. So when I am talking about hitting people, you're not causing blunt force trauma. You are not going to go through somebody's skull. You're not going to be breaking ribs, and well, okay, you might be breaking ribs, but you're not doing like huge amounts of physical damage. What you are doing is breaking things in very precise locations. But just so you're aware of that, what other canes have I got here? This is another training cane. Again, 1-inch rattan, just with a hook on it. It's just a different style of cane. The important thing is the hook can be used for certain techniques. Normally when we're training, we'll use the cane at this end, and we'll use it as a straight cane. It just happens to have a hook on the end. When we're actually dealing with proper hook techniques, we would actually use it with the hook forward. But we're not going to look at any of those today, just to point that out for interest's sake. What else do I have here? I have this cane. This cane is relatively special. It's not one that I use for fighting. This is actually my everyday cane, because I have arthritis in one foot and quite often have to actually use a cane to get around. So I don't use this one for fighting. It's not particularly good for fighting, but it is one that I use every day. This is my emergency cane, which sometimes I will carry around if I'm not sure whether I need the other one or not. Standard kind of break apart with elastic. This is not good for fighting with, at least not in the style that we'll be looking at today, because the problem is when you swing it, and I'm going to regret doing this, it will start coming apart at the elastic. It's absolutely useless for that. Now you can use it when we come to looking at some of the shillelagh techniques, if we end up looking at shillelagh techniques. But just so you're aware, this kind of cane completely useless for what we're going to be looking at the minute. Right, okay, so those are some of the canes that we've got, some of the canes that we use. I use these in demonstrations, I use them for training. But just so you've got an idea, you can use pretty much any kind of cane you can get. Try and get something with a bit of flexibility, a bit solid, because you don't want something that's going to snap midway practicing, which is why I wouldn't advise broom handles, that kind of thing, because they tend to shatter. Anyway, that's enough randomly talking about canes. Let's get on with some actual useful information. When we're holding a cane, and I'm going to assume for today that we're only going to be using a cane with our on hand. Okay, so we've got some terminology as well. On hand and off hand. I use this simply because it's easier than switching left and right when you have a southpaw training with you, which I have for the entire time that I've been training Bartitsu. So, on hand for me, it's my right hand. Okay, because I am right-handed. It is the one I have more dexterity in. And what I'm looking for is what we call a hammer grip, yeah? We're not like saber, where the finger goes up the back. Yeah, we're not looking at some kind of, we had quillians or something, we'd be looking to kind of wrap the finger round. It's what we call a hammer grip. It's a straight grip, and the cane comes at about a 90 degree, sorry, I'm going to try and move so that the sun isn't blocking the entire view out. 90 degrees angle from my hand, and I'm going to hold that fairly solidly. It's important I have a chunk sticking out the bottom, 4 or 5 inches sticking out the bottom of the hand, which we call the hook, and we're going to use that quite a bit. So it's important that that is there, and the rest of the cane then comes sticking out the top. If you have a knobbly bit or a heavy bit of your cane, it goes furthest away from you, because that's the bit we want to hit people with, because that's where the weight is. Okay? So, in this case, it's a straight cane. I've just put the black stopper on the end so that I know which one is technically the heavy end. Although, in fact, it's not. But there we go. That is how you hold the cane. Now, in terms of stance, there are 2 stances. One of them you're going to use a lot, and one of them you'll use very occasionally. The main one we're going to use is the offensive stance. The reason that we use this most of the time is we're armed. We have a weapon. We don't want to keep that weapon out of the way, so instead it wants to be forward. And that's really the difference. The offensive, we're forward. The defensive, we're back. Okay? So we don't want to be back here most of the time. This is unarmed. This is armed. We want to stick it forward. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with our onside facing forward. And much like the stance for Bartitsu, my front foot pointing directly at my opponent. My back foot about shoulders width back, half a shoulder's width out to the side, turned at 45 degrees, bent the knees. Okay, I've got a solid stance and I can move wherever I need to from here. The cane itself, we're going to hold above the head. Straight above the head and pointing at my opponent, which in this case is all of you on the other side of that view screen. So there is my cane up in the air, straight arm pointing straight at you, and my offhand I curl up and basically put in a fist over my solar plexus. Okay? So if I turn around so you can see what that looks like from the side, I'm in my stance, my hand goes up, and the cane is pointing really far forward, my other hand tucked in. So from the other side, arm is up, hand tucked in. The reason we keep the hand up is because this is not a sword. And that's something we're going to have to get our heads round with as we go through this session. But the 2 things that we really need to grasp about it is A, it doesn't have a guard. Yeah, most swords will have either some kind of quillions or cross guard, or they'll have a basket covering of the hand if you're looking at something more like a saber or a backsword. We don't have any of that, which means the way gravity works, if an attack comes in, gravity goes down and it goes through my fingers. Yeah, there's nothing there to stop it. So what I want to do is keep my hand high so that gravity takes things away from my fingers after they've been hit. So that's really one of the golden rules, is always the hand is high. We're of course going to ignore that about half the time when we actually come to using it, but the golden rule as far as we're concerned for today, and in terms of the cane style we're looking at today, which I should say is Vignay cane style, but I'm going to talk about Vignay later, so you'll hear all about that. I want to keep my hand high, and I also never, one of the golden rules, I never want to let my hand go below my eyes. The minute I get to here, my head is vulnerable. Okay? Now we talked about this being a light stick. The main target I'm worried about somebody hitting is my head. Yeah? I'll take a few punches, I'll take a few hits, possibly even a light stab to the body, but I can't take any of those things to my head. So I've got to guard the head, so it's got to stay above eye level. The other main thing to remember about this not being a sword is it doesn't have an edge. And you will find a lot of people trying to contort themselves in order to bring this imaginary edge that goes along the side of the knuckles in play. Yeah, if it was a sword, that's where the edge would be, and that's what I'd want to hit with. This is blunt all the way around. Okay, so it doesn't have an edge. But what that means is every single angle of it is equally as dangerous as every other angle. So if I hit sideways, or hit with the back of it, or do kind of sneaky round shots, all of those are perfectly acceptable because there's not a true edge. Okay, the offhand, curling up here. Now a lot of people like to keep it out the way because it's not really doing anything most of the time. So if you keep it out of the way, it doesn't get hurt. The problem is there are times when I do want to use it. So if somebody's coming in for an attack and I've blocked, I may actually want to try and grab their hand, grab the cane before I come in with my own attack. I can't do that if it's out the way. I don't like keeping it on the hip in a very saberish kind of fashion. It looks very British, very, you know, I'm a little teapot, but it leaves that elbow hanging out and somebody will just take a shot at it because people, especially me, tend to be a bit evil like that. So instead I like to keep it coiled up nice and tight here, Also means if somebody tries to go for a quick jab to your solar plexus, it's going to bounce off your hand rather than wind you. So that's our stance, and that's going to feel weird, but it's something you're going to have to get used to. Now, if we want to go to defensive stance, all I'm going to do is change the way my feet are. The cane stays above my head, but it's now much further back. Yeah? So it's only just covering the front of my body here. I've got much less range. That's offensive, that's defensive there. The main reason I'm going to use that is there are times where I want to entice somebody in and make them attack my body, and I'm going to move out of the way as I attack. But for now, defensive is what we're going to use most of the time. So, you can now stand like you know Vigne cane, okay? That's all great. The next thing we have to work on is building up some strength and flexibility in the arms, because it's not natural, okay? So the first drill we're going to do is a series of swings just to start building your wrists up, okay? So hand out, that's going to come down at the front, and you're going to keep it nice and close to the body. So you want to get that going round on your true side. Now the problem is, a lot of people will drop the cane and open the hand to get round there. And it becomes this kind of swinging, kind of rocking motion. The problem is if I'm here and something connects with this, it's just going to fly away. So I want a good solid grip. So even when I'm here, I'm bringing my elbow across so that my hand can stay firmly gripped onto that cane. So I need to be able to get that going on one side of the body and then reverse it so that I can bring it in the other direction as well. And all of this you're going to find really working your arms, especially your forearms and your wrist. But you have to get used to that. Okay? Most of cane happens in the wrist. It's a bit more like saber in that way, that a lot of it will be driven with the wrist in very quick motions, and the power, if it's needed, will be provided with the rest of the body. It's not like something like backsword, where you comes more from the shoulder and the elbow with a bit more of a larger swing to it. So you need to build up those muscles in your forearm and your wrist. So once we've done one side, you need to move over to the other side. And the idea is I'm trying to keep this as vertical up and down as I can, which is really difficult to do, but you need to practice trying to get it as best you can, and then in the reverse direction as well. Okay? Once you're happy with all of those, we've got the one. This will be the first time you hit yourself in the head with a stick. We've all done it. Now I've said it, I'm probably going to do it myself right now. We're going to look at this helicopter. We're again trying to keep it as flat as possible, and we're spinning it above the head. Then you reverse it, and this is the point you bring it around and somebody will bring it into the back of their head. But you want to keep that going above your head there. Again, just building up slightly different movement of the arm. Once you're happy with all of those, we can move to the downwards X. So I'm cutting forward, bringing it right round this side, cutting forward. I'm doing this with the arm so you can see the X motion. Okay? That kind of motion. Well, what I actually want to do is get it in my wrist so that it all happens out in front of me here. I've still got that same X, cut down X there, but it's now happening with my wrist way out in front of me. And then I'm going to change direction, and now I'm cutting upwards each time, and again just building that flexibility. So another thing we're learning here is arms always got to be forward. If I bring my hand back here for some giant strike, when I'm here I am completely exposed with nothing to defend myself. So we just don't do it. This hand always stays in front of the body. It's in front of the body. Whatever I'm doing, that hand stays in front and high. Okay, once you've got the hang of that, the only other thing I'd recommend is holding it in about the middle, swinging it side to side just to get a rotational around your wrist as well. Now, once you're happy with all that, I would recommend you do all of the same stuff on the left hand side, because eventually we're going to be passing the cane between the hands quite a lot. We're not going to focus on that today. And then the other thing I would suggest is once you're quite happy with both hands, you want to learn the transition behind your back again, because it's a good exercise, good dexterity training. So from here, I'm going to drop the cane behind me so it's touching my bicep and then sticking out the bottom. From there I can grab it with the other hand and bring it so that it's dropping down, again touching my bicep. So I can move that quite happily back and forth. Almost like nunchucks or some other silly weapon like that if you are a fan of those things. But we're just doing it with the solid stick as a flexibility drill. From there, I'm going to change it, so now I'm coming up. So the hand's coming underneath, scraping the bicep, and I grab it from the top and I move round. Okay, once you've done all of those, you've started to build up some kind of flexibility and everything in your wrists. We're good to move on to some actual tactics, or rather some actual strikes. I'm only going to look at 4 strikes and 3 parries today. That's all we're going to need for what we're looking at today. So the first strike is what we call the vertical down. Okay, I call it the vertical down because I find it easier to refer to things in specific ways. You might know it as cut 7 if you're familiar with Hutton parrying sequence. Hutton Moulinet sequence if you've done other things, but it is a vertical downwards cut. I'm cutting down that vertical line directly between me and my opponent. So from here, I roll my hand over and that strike comes down. Keeping it nice and high so that I'm striking my opponent on the head. So from here, it curls past me and down at my opponent. And then I'm just recovering to guard each time. Back to guard, strike, back to guard, strike, back to guard. Okay, that is our vertical down. It's going to be used quite a lot, particularly for trying to smack our opponent on the head, or once we've positioned their arm for trying to smack the forearms and try and break some of these weaker bones in the forearm. Might occasionally try and use it on the clavicle as well. The fact there's a vertical down indicates that there must also be the existence of a vertical up, and that is another attack we'll use. So rather than coming down, this time I'm coming up that same vertical line, up here. Now again, I'm got to start from guard. So what I'm actually going to do is take a loop round and back up. And it looks very weird doing it from guard. Okay? The reason for that is you're very unlikely to ever actually use this attack from guard. Yeah, it's a very weak attack from guard. When you're going to use it is normally after you've done a downwards vertical. So I'm going to do a downwards vertical and reverse it straight back up that line. That kind of thing is much more likely to be when I'm going to use it. Which means once we start getting into these things, we're going to use it in times when we're feigning. So we're going to come over with an attack, get them to parry, and then change the line. That was terrible because I'm off the camera here. If I attack high, wait for them to parry, and then come underneath with a sneaky attack. That's more when we're going to use this. So that's your vertical down and your vertical up. The next one I want to look at is we call the tick-tock, or really they are the true and false horizontals. So that's going on that cross line, where I'm trying to really hit them directly across where their eyes are. So from here, the first one we have is the tick, and then we have the tock. It's called that because you can just tick-tock as long as you want and batter somebody around the head. But really it's a true or an on this side, whatever your good side is, your on side horizontal and your off side horizontal. Hopefully that makes sense. So you can do that quite happily. Attack, 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 attack. Just to give you an idea of where those are going. Again, it's very hard to come straight into the top. So if I'm here, I end up just kind of circling round with this little tap to try and get it to hit on that side. I'm much more likely to use it after I've wound it up by doing that initial tick action. The other thing is there's 2 important ways we hit, and you can do these 2 ways of hitting with each one. The first one, if we're just going to look at vertical down for the minute, I can come over the top and strike as if it was a sword. My knuckles are facing my opponent. This would be my true edge if it was a sword and I hit them. I come to the reverse, my knuckles are pointing up, I attack as if I had an edge. Yeah, again, if I'm going horizontally, I swing across my knuckles have turned. If I had an edge, I would be slicing. Okay? Those are what we think of as being more kind of sword-like hits. And you can do them with the cane. They're powerful. You will definitely use them. However, if you want to substitute something, if you want to substitute a little bit of that power for more speed, there's an alternate version of these attacks you can do. Now in cane, as I said, it's not a big heavy bludgeoning weapon, so speed and accuracy are what we really need to be aiming for. So there's no point hitting a nice big chunky meaty bit of arm with a lot of power. You're going to bruise it, but you're not going to do any real damage. What you want to do is really quickly hit something like a cheekbone that's going to break, or an elbow, or a rib, something that's going to be quick and snappy. So if you want to trade for speed, this is how you do it. So if we're looking at the attack over the top, rather than hitting with the front of the blade, I'm going to come over the top and hit with the back of the blade. But as I said, we're not using a blade, so it doesn't matter. We can use both of these equally well. So from there, my attack comes over the top. So from here, just trying it from different angles, so hopefully you can get an idea of what I'm actually doing. Okay? We're going to come back and look at that when we're talking about the form in a little bit. From there, it's also really easy to reverse that back. You're not likely to use this kind of almost backhand for the upwards, for the vertical up, but you can use it for the vertical down, and it gives you a really quick attack into that vertical up. So the vertical up is always going to be done with the sword strike. The tick-tock, the horizontals, again, rather than bringing it across, I can just twist at the wrist and hit with what would be the side or the flat of the blade, and then come round the other side and hit with the other flat. And that's how I can really bounce that with a lot of speed. Rather than this, I can get a lot more speed in that. So, those are your attacks that you need to worry about to start with, okay? All aimed at the other guy's head. Most of the time, you can quite happily bray upon them to your heart's content now. The next thing you need to know is how to defend. Now, I've already said when we want to defend, if somebody's coming in with a big cut coming in at this side, natural instinct is that this is a sword and I'm going to parry it across here like this. And it's going to hit and stop here. And as I said, we'll lose our fingers. So what we need to get used to is from here, taking that parry across here. If you are used to sword terminology, rather than looking at a parry and cart, we want to be looking at a parry and prime. Or instead of a parry and fourth, we want to be looking at parry and first. However your school tends to teach it, that's another way if you're familiar with those terms. If you're not, all I'm looking to do is essentially bring my forearm to almost touching my forehead. I just need to get that cane past me. Again, like I've said with everything else, I don't need to parry and a foot. Yeah, I'm not helping anybody there. I just need to get that parry for me. So that's going to stop anything coming in on this side. If I need to, I can drop it down a little bit, but better drop my legs to cover a bit lower down. If it's coming on the other side, I've got that same drop to cover this side of me as well. That's kind of awkward. Normally if I'm coming that side, I'm either going to be passing back and giving myself more room, or I'm going to pass forward and close in. But technically you can just drop it down and take that parry there. So that's your two parries. Again, if you're looking for sword terminology, rather than a third, you want to be parrying in a very high second. I know I'm switching my English and French. You will just have to get used to that because I'm useless at remembering which ones go with which. The other one we need to look at is the parry or fifth, or the St. George's parry, or the roof block, depending on which particular school you might be coming from. From our point of view, what it is, it's the one that guards against that vertical down. So from our guard, we're just going to bring the cane up directly above us so that that other cane bounces off and doesn't hurt us. So from here, we're just coming back to there. If you really want, it's worth knowing there is also a reverse roof block. So from here, I can come up to the other side. It's occasionally useful depending on which parry you're in to know that you have that alternate available to you. So what you can do now is you can block somebody attacking you, you can strike back. You can come back to another block, you can strike back. You can take a parry to the head, you can strike back, okay? It's very simple, but in about 20 minutes we've covered you the basics of cane fighting, okay? So, those are the things to practice and train if you want to get familiar with using a cane, you want to get comfortable holding one, you want to get comfortable with all of the mechanics and things we'll be using. Those are the techniques. Practice your swings, yeah? Practice your basic attacks, practice your parries. Okay, those are the things that are going to hold you in good stead. Right, anybody got any questions at this point? Michael's been very, very quiet in the corner, so I'm slightly worried.
We've got no questions on the feed there at the moment.
Great.
Something I have just realised though is the video is mirrored.
Sorry?
I was wondering why you were doing everything in left-handed, and I realised it's because the
Oh, yes, the camera switched around the other way. This is my right hand, yes. Yes, for those of you who are confused by mirrors, yes, I am actually right-handed. This is my right hand. It's all good. If you follow this along perfectly and you're right-handed and you manage to do it all left-handed, then the really good news is you're going to have a really easy time when you try doing it on the other side. Anyway,
the picture quality is brilliant.
I'm going to move on to my rambling section. I know I ramble a lot anyway, but this is where you get a real insight into what it's like being at one of my classes, because my students distract me into talking about something and I ramble for a bit and forget their class. So this is my rambling phase and trying to give you that feeling I'm just talking about some stuff. So today we're going to talk about Pierre Vignay, who I think is a fantastic gentleman. He designed the cane system that Bartitsu uses. Yeah. So when I talk about cane, unless I'm specifying something else, I will automatically be defaulting to talking about Vignay cane. We do look at bits of shillelagh, particularly Doyle family and MacDonald family. Shillelagh that we use occasionally, but predominantly most of the stuff we do is Vignay cane. So that's worth knowing a little bit about who he is and where he comes from. So, who is Pierre Vignay? Well, he is a French-born gentleman, born in Paris, I want to say 1860, something round about that kind of time. He grows up very much involved in physical culture and in fencing. And really his first job is with the French army as a master-at-arms, which is a great title, but what it basically means is he was a PT instructor. His job was to get all of the soldiers fit and to be in charge of their physical training so that they were obviously then able to go and fight. So that was his job. After that, he actually moved over to actually serve in the army and served with the 2nd Regiment. My memory's not great, so if I'm slightly off on some of this, I apologise. 2nd Regiment of French Artillery, which was based in Grenoble, which is a place I know because I used to have to go there on science trips when I was back as a scientist in about 3 careers ago. But he was stationed out at Grenoble and trained there. Sorry, not trained there. He was part of the French army there as an artillery officer. From there, he moved to Geneva, where he set up a self-defense and fencing school. So this is where we see him moving away from just training soldiers to training civilians. And he's teaching them not only traditional fencing, in terms of what at that point would be sports fencing, he's also teaching them a little bit of the historical fencing stuff that's starting to arise in Europe at that point, and also self-defense. So again, he's covering boxing, he knew Savat, he was also developing his own system, as we'll come to. And actually, it's actually his own system, which is obviously the cane fighting, that catches the eye of Barton Wright, who is in the process of setting up the Bartitsu Club in London. So after Geneva, an invitation from Barton Wright, Pierre comes across and moves to London and starts teaching as part of the Bartitsu Society, teaching predominantly Savat and cane. And obviously the cane work that he developed is what you see. It's very categorized with this high cane position. And if you type Bartitsu into Google, or you've looked at anything on Bartitsu, there will come up a picture within the first, I would say, 10 hits of a guy in a kind of dinner jacket and a boater, is that the right word? Boater hat. with a cane held up around here. It's that iconic and that link to it, and that all comes from Pierre Vignay. As well as using the cane, he also did a lot of work on the umbrella and parasol as a self-defense weapon as well. Again, because they were things the Victorians liked, because they were obsessed with anything they could fiddle with, and they didn't have fidget spinners back then, so things like walking sticks and fans and umbrellas and parasols become very popular. So anyway, he trains in... brain's just gone there. Sorry, yeah, so he trains in London for a while. We know he also briefly taught Edith Garud, who is an interesting figure I'll probably talk about another time, and how she links to the suffragette movement. But eventually the Bartitsu Club breaks up, and the first thing that Pierre does is he sets up his own self-defense and fencing school in London. And he continues to teach in London, teaching pretty much the same stuff he'd been teaching at the Bartitsu Society for quite a significant period of time. He eventually moves back to Geneva, not entirely sure why, but he moves back to Geneva and starts up again a completely different fencing school and self-defense school back in Geneva. And sadly that's where we lose track of him. We don't really know anything about the tail end of his life, but we know he makes it through to the 1920s or so, and probably further. But yeah, his lasting contribution was this way of fighting with a cane. Now, to give you an idea of how much of an impact this had, round about the, I want to say probably 1920s, that kind of region, a guy, Superintendent Lang, I want to say. Is it Lang or Ling?
Now, it is Lang.
It is Lang. I'm being confirmed it's Lang. Oh, my memory failing me there. But Superintendent Lang is a member of the Indian police force. And what they're having a discussion about whether they want to have armed police officers or not. And eventually they decide against it, but rather than arming them with a baton or a truncheon, as we did for a long time, and indeed America does as well. America also arms them with guns, but they decided to give them a longer stick, a longer baton, and they used Vignay's style of cane fencing became the official crowd control method of the Italian of the Indian police force, thanks to Lang. The other great thing he does is he writes an instruction book, and that's the key thing, because Pierre never wrote down any of what he did, or at least not in a way that I think we have access to. But there's a very good book out there written by Lang. You can buy it off Amazon and stuff. If you're interested, that is the book to go to. It's a very good, well-structured system for learning Vignay-style cane. And so that's really good.
Method of self-defense.
Sorry?
I believe it's called the walking stick method of self-defense.
The walking stick method of self-defense. There you go. That's the actual title of the book. I'm sorry I ended up working later than I planned to, so I don't quite have all of my props to hand. Grabbing my copy of that book was on the list, but I haven't done it. So yes, that's there. You can go find that. It's brilliant, but that was really good as well. The other thing is that a little bit later on, that book ends up being used by the Jewish community in Palestine in 1940s. Is that where I'm going? I wasn't sure if it was 40s or 60s there, but I think I'm 40s, yes.
The 40s.
They end up using it as a basis for self-defense in a way that is non-lethal, so they can try and maintain some level of non-violent self-defense. I mean, if you crack somebody over the head with a cane, it's still violent, but you know. So this is something that has actually had quite an impact over the last kind of 100 years. So anyway, that was just to give you an idea of who Pierre Vignay is when we talk about Vignay and his cane style, and where that all kind of comes into it. From our point of view, we're particularly interested in the time he was teaching with Barton Wright, obviously, because that ties into Bartitsu. We also know that he did some training with Egerton Castle and Alfred Hutton. I will definitely be talking about Hutton at some point in these, because he's like one of my heroes. So we'll be... you know, so he was dealing with those people as well, who were very much at the start of what we now think of as the HEMA movement, you know, 100 years later. Anyway, that's enough talking. Let's get on to looking at how to actually start hitting people with a cane. Now, we have a form for this as well. I'm going to go through the form because, again, it gives you a series of movements you can practice and link together. But we'll, again, go through each one, and then what we will do is we'll break it down and look at each individual technique. So the first techniques we're going to look at is the first three techniques we're going to string together. One of them is it's a vertical down attack, a vertical up attack, and then another vertical down attack. So in terms of the hand movement, it's really simple. We start from our guard position. We're coming over the top for a vertical down. We're coming underneath for a vertical up, and then back over the top for a vertical down. And all of these are delivered sword style. So by that I mean your knuckles as if you had a true edge. So vertical down, vertical up, vertical down. Now, obviously as you're learning, hopefully from everything else you've watched about Bartitsu, a lot of it is to do with how we derive power from the body. And we're going to go back to some stuff we looked at in the pugilism form for generating power. We're going to be looking at a drop step, followed by a double drop step, followed by a lunge. Okay? So rather than just doing these attacks, I'll do these ones sideways. So rather than just doing an attack, an attack, and an attack, we're going to do the first one with the drop step. So we're going to lift this foot and fall into it. So we're not lowering ourselves down, we're lifting the foot and letting gravity pull us. So we want to connect before that foot lands, so that our body weight and that momentum is behind the attack. That's our first attack. From there, we're going to lift the second leg to drop down that back bit as we come round to the upwards attack. We're going to lift the front foot a little bit too, just so we get a full amount of gravity on our side for the second attack. So we're going to drop again, and then use that coiled energy there to lunge forward into our third strike down. So we're going down, down, forward. Down, down, forward. That's just simply a basic way of generating power. Yeah? So if I swing over and I'm hitting somebody on the head, that has some force in it, but not enough to take my opponent down. That does. Bang. Put a lot more power, a lot more energy into it. That's enough to start actually trying to break a skull or break a bone. Likewise, that is a very weak attack. But that is coming in with a lot more power. That swing up really puts a snap into it. Again, you're looking up to start breaking bones. And the lunge, although it will put more force into it, it also covers ground. Yeah? Although I can lunge, will put more force into that cane, I'm also now 2 foot closer to where my opponent is. Yeah? So either I can use it to close distance, I can use it to actually physically just barge into my opponent. I'm controlling distance with that one more than just doing straight amounts of damage. But those are your first three techniques that just flow one after the other. So from guard, drop, double drop, lunge. Okay? Now, if you remember, we had the power generating pugilism form was a straight line there and back again. We then looked at the square of Svat, where you went round the 4 edges of a square to get back to where you started from. The third one, which we'll not be looking at quite yet, which is to do with the jiu-jitsu form, is 4 directions jiu-jitsu, where we move out on the 4 cardinal points to end up back in the center. This one is, because clearly by now you're understanding I have some deep weird love of geometry, is the semicircle of cane. So we can't just go backwards and forwards, we have to move around our opponent. Okay? And part of the reason I've written that is to encourage you not to stand still. So when you're fighting, you don't want to get into this almost modern day sports fencing idea of backwards and forwards. I want it to be much more dynamic and moving sideways around my opponent. So we've built that into the form. So what we're going to do is, after we've done our first 3 attacks, we come back to guard, and then we're going to instantly break our golden rule and do a low line parry across here, as if somebody was attacking in at this kind of angle down here. And we're going to parry in what would be 4th or card, if you're a fencer of some description. So from here, my hand comes down and blocks out on that line. From there, we're going to do a weird step and hook technique. which looks like this. This one is really, really difficult to explain without a partner. So, again, I'm going to have to improvise a partner. And I apologise for those of you who saw me dancing with a pair of legs a couple of weeks ago. This is my partner for today. This is my partner's arm. This is my partner's cane. So when I'm holding this here, that is their attack coming in to hit me. So what I'm going to do is block, this is really awkward to do, is block that attack as it comes in. And then what I want to do is wrap the hook, and I told you this hook bit was important, over their hand. So it's above their hand and behind their cane. From there, if I had my feet the right way around, I can then lock everything solid and just pivot my feet. Their cane goes out of the way and my cane goes into their head, and I've moved towards them. I'm going to do that from a few different angles and hopefully it'll make sense. So if this attack's coming in here, I'm going to block. It's really awkward to do. Block. Go between the top over their wrist but behind their cane. Get my feet in the right position. And then step forward. Again, if their attack's coming in here, I'm going to block. Wrap above their wrist and behind the cane. I'll get my feet in the right position at one point. And then step forward. Hopefully that makes sense. It's a very useful technique, which is why we put it right in at the beginning of the form. And you can do it on the other side, you can do it high and low, there's a whole load we can explore with hooks. But for right now, I wanted to get it right in at the beginning to get that kind of idea in your head. So, we're going to have a down, up, down, back to guard, block across, hook, and we're going to move essentially 45 degrees out. And from there, we're going to spin the back leg round through the other 45 degrees as well to come into a defensive stance, facing 90 degrees from where we started. So if I start facing you, down, up, down, guard, block, hook, step, step. I'll do that from a couple of other angles and hopefully it'll make sense. So down, up, down, back to guard, block, hook and step, defensive stance. Down, up, down, back to guard, block, hook, pass, defensive stance. Okay, so that's your first bit. You've moved 90 degrees around your opponent. So if my opponent was literally standing there, 1 attack, 2 attacks, 3 attacks, block, hook, move. My opponent being where they were, I've now moved round a quarter of a circle around them. Okay? And that's just a quarter of the way through the form. We're going to move to the back and then come back along that same line to get back to where we started. Hopefully that makes sense so far. How are we doing time-wise? Running late as ever. Brilliant. Okay. So, the next part of the form, we're going to look at those tick-tocks, those horizontal actions. So we're going to start with, from our defensive stance, of stepping forward with an attack to the head. And we're going to deliver it, this time, with the side of the blade, the side of the stick, as it were. So we're not using the sword strikes, we're using these much more cane strikes. So from defensive, we're going to step forward and deliver an attack. The next one's going to go down to the knee, and then we're going to come back up to the head. Now, you'll have noticed as I went for the knee, I have broken another one of these cardinal rules. My hand is down here. This time we're not going to break that, because what's actually going to happen there is they're going to parry, and as I go down, they're going to crack me in the top of the head, and I'm out. So instead, we do want to attack the knee, but we have to keep the cane above our eyes. So the only way we can do this is to get our eyes all the way down there. And this is where cane starts to get a bit more energetic. So from here, my first strike is at the head. My second strike drops all the way down and comes for the knee, and then comes back up again for the head. If you were with me the last couple of weeks and we were looking at combinations, we quite often use this high-low principle. And that's really what we're doing here. So we come from our defensive stance, step forward, attack, down, back up again, and then recover back to our defensive stance. It's nothing complicated. You just need to get used to this weird hitting with the side of the blade, and then this idea of being able to get low enough and high enough again to change those levels of the attack. Once you've done those, we've literally just got a last quarter to do. And to do this, we're going to go for our guard, and we're going to take this parry on the inside here, on our true side or our on side. We don't want to just do that though, because quite often that's going to leave us in a really horrible cramped position on this side. My arm's kind of twisted up. So what I'm going to do as I do this is I'm going to pass off to the side. I'm creating even more space. But the other thing I'm doing is, because their cane is still here, I'm opening up this huge space in the middle where nobody has a weapon. And their weapon is on the outside of mine. So what I'm then going to do is step a sweeping arc through the middle of that space and pummel strike them across the face. So, I block and step, and I come through that middle space. And then from there, spin and come back up to my offensive guard. I'm aware I keep disappearing off the corner. I'm trying to stay close enough that the light doesn't go weird, but not far enough back that you can actually see me. Right, okay, so from here, stepping off to the side, coming through the middle, and back up into my guard. So let's try this from a different angle. If I'm here, block and step, through the middle, back up into my guard. Which direction haven't I done it from? This one maybe. So from here, block and step, through the middle, back into my guard. And that will actually take us a full way around. So if I start here, I will end with my back to you. And that is the first half of the form. I'll go through it in the other two directions as well, just so you get a chance to see it. And that is your first half of the cane form. So, we've done that one, it's just stepping out the way, and then it's just getting that practice of using that swing with the hip to generate power. And again, using this hook to land a nice solid blow across the chin as you do. And that is really all there is to that form. Checking the time again. So, quick recap on what we've looked at there. We spent quite a lot of time looking at the handling of the cane. We've looked a bit about the history of where the cane came from and started to look at the form. Okay, if you want to learn that form in more detail, this is on Facebook now. Just go back and rewatch it until you can do each of those movements and learn it. If you're looking for homework, and I hope you did your homework before, practicing your first and second form, building up that vocabulary that we're going to use as we go further into Bartitsu. Homework for this time: practice your cane handling drills. If you can't swing a cane around without having to stop and think about the angles, if you can't move the cane comfortably around, you can't fight with it. Okay? You need to get comfortable with it, and the only way to do that is practice moving the cane and move through the different actions we have looked at today. And then practice your form, okay? Those techniques are ones that we're going to use. They're the ones you're going to use if you ever need to fight with it, if you're ever sparring. These attacks, high, low, all of this kind of stuff you're going to use. So practice those, keep practicing them, and eventually you will get quite proficient at cane. If you are coming back next week, which I hope you are, we will be looking at the second half of that cane form. So you're going to learn how to get back round again using a different set of techniques. One of them is rubbish, but is in there for canonical reasons, and the other one is absolutely brilliant. So still well worth learning. So we'll look at the second half of that form to take you back and complete that kind of basic set of moves. What I want to look at then is we'll go on to where cane really comes into its own, and we'll start looking at two-handed cane. Now I don't mean we're going to use this like a baseball bat. What I mean is when we start parrying, we're going to use both hands. The reason for that being I can then as easily come off with an attack here or here if I'm competent with both hands. So we're going to take it a little bit further. We're going to look at finishing off that kind of form with one hand, and then we're going to start looking at how we can use the cane with two hands. So hopefully you found that interesting. If you've got a stick, go out and practice. You know, it's good exercise, and you know, it's good fun swinging a cane around. Who doesn't want to pretend that they are a Victorian gentleman smacking some ruffian around the head with an umbrella? So go, have fun, make believe. That's why most of us got into this. Most of us did not get into this because it was historically interesting or because we wanted to learn complicated technique. We got into it because we wanted to be knights swinging swords around. Or we wanted to be one of the three musketeers, okay? So go, make believe, swing canes around. It's fun. Doesn't mean you can't learn it and do it properly, okay? It just means that you look better than the people who are just waving swords around. Anyway, that's me off on one of my rants. I'll stop again before I go on forever. So next week we'll be looking more at the cane. As usual, if anybody's got any questions, just bung them in and I will pick them up after I finish this session, go through them, answer any questions that you've got. Obviously I'm here all week. I don't go anywhere because that's the whole point of isolation. I will be at this house, so feel free to message me, email, phone me, whatever, and I will talk to you about Bartitsu stuff and particularly cane. And I think that kind of takes us to the end of this class. So again, thank you very much for joining us, and we shall fall out. So again, we start from an attention stance and we fall out. We strike, and because it's the end of the class, we come back to an attention stance. So, been brilliant. I've had a good time for the last hour, admittedly talking to myself and annoying my neighbours. Hopefully some of you out there have learned something or found something interesting, and I will see you again next week for more fun with canes. Until then, stay safe and above all, be kind. Take care.